So we all know that we need some radical differences to occur in order to effect change. So why shouldn't art making be the space for that difference? It's possible to position artists to examine climate change or the impacts of global capital, yet the voice of an artist historically has stayed with their work. And in our times, we have created silos for our activities, whether those are creative, political, social, or related to entertainment, that are not always helpful. To effect change in this occasion, we have the possibility to use the unique space of the exhibition, which introduces art to its public, to a new set of exchanges. However, both of our subjects are still somehow missing: the artist and their potential audience.
I think that the thing is that I think that art is a very interesting universal language, and it is something that can offer something to everybody, like nature can. And you can stick your head in the sand and not want to go there, but it is interesting if you endeavour. It's worth doing.
Oh, absolutely. Art definitely has an advantage for creating a set of open exchanges with an audience, especially when you're bringing in fields that cross over with art, and all of a sudden you've opened up these new avenues that you could not talk about in their original fields. I think in terms of creating an open and direct exchange, I have to bring it back to the social context of art, and how people prepare themselves to go to have an art experience. They might be consciously telling themselves as they enter the experience to be open, or maybe they've done this so many times that it's become kind of a reflex. But I think that that's where a lot of the power lies. It's in the way that people it's in the ritual, I think. Yeah. The ritual of going to see art.
The collective had the idea of bringing this upright piano into the show. There were lots of conversations, and I tried to draw on some of the kind of artistic methodologies of the collective and bring that into the work. I think music does have a special kind of, probably I'd even call it advantage over a lot of purely visual arts, and the fact that ultimately it's not representational. So it means that the listener can come into the work, the world can come into the work in a particular way that maybe is not so possible in visual artworks.
Is that I do think in this day and age, artists do have a responsibility to say something or do something, and in every artwork I do try to do something. In terms of like how I might affect a viewer, but as you say, it comes back down to that thing. As on the other hand, that the power of art lies in the fact that it doesn't have to say something specific or represent it, anything in a very literal way. So the power of it lies in the sense that it can be outside of those sort of final or totalizing kind of senses of meaning. You can bring a lot of things up, but you do not have to fix yourself on one particular outcome or answer as such.
So, yes, I think art's openness and connection and communication and prayer-like aesthetic qualities at times are really interesting, but I don't know if they're interesting for you as the audience. I think the audience then needs to go to work on them. And how that should happen is, then takes us into paradigms of display and care and what a museum should be and what a gallery should be. I think, as you know from the kinds of conversations we've been having, I love that space, but I also don't trust that space. And yeah.
All art is socialized in some way, yet there are certainly lingering stereotypes of art's insularity that have separated art and artists' thinking from what might be considered the center of things. So, when social and political pressures are intensified, there certainly follows a questioning of art's centrality, either personally or socially. When what we might call social urgency occurs, it's not always the case, however, that art's motivations change. Often the personal, habitual practice of making art is entrenched in daily life. But the point is, how do we want to encounter art and artists in our world?
If you look, in the New Zealand Herald, if you wanted to find about art, it's always under entertainment. But I'll never be satisfied with that. I actually think I'm changing the world. I can have a really big influence on people and they can change their view. And people who never even knew that they liked Ray Shremmerd and Black Beatles and, these songs that I'm putting on will suddenly realise that that was their favourite music of their whole life, and they've been missing art, and that their life is not extended and they should try harder.
The internet is, it's a world in its own, I'm always constantly thinking about the digital and the physical spaces. And I think it has, there's a conversation between those two worlds in a lot of the work that I make. And it has, it definitely affects, That's kind of why I like being outside. I kind of like, happy accidents, meeting new people, all those kinds of experiences, and conversations. I like that sort of, real face-to-face connectivity with people. But then I'm quite interested or fascinated by the effect that a digital space has on people and how that has actually changed the way I guess we communicate with each other as well.
I've never seen the kind of socio-political scenario I want to see. It's always been a kind of disaster. And then my adult life, which has included a kind of social mobility, has totally been about making art and totally about being an artist. So I don't really know how to be in the world without this practice. So things aren't more urgent because they might be getting worse. But I've always felt a kind of urgency.
The expectation for these 12-inch records was that they wouldn't be played because in a lot of cases there might have been some sound of wind or there might have been somebody walking past, but it wouldn't have been a sound that created any extra meaning above what you already knew that this was the site where this thing happened or this was the place where you were standing. So that to me is Julian engaging very closely with the audience, whoever the audience might be, and asking them to take his place and stand where he stood.
As much as I do think the idea of the artist not being this isolated genius has been dismantled somewhat, I do think that there is still a desire, I don't know if it's from artists or from the public, to preserve this narrative. And for me, I guess I realized quite early on in my work that what was really important to dismantling that was not having any sense of your ideas or your information being privatized. And so therefore you have to be really willing and really vulnerable to share and not feel like a kind of sovereign sense of ownership over particular ideas and content. And I'm not saying that means that you can go out there and just suddenly start stealing people's content.
Writers are often asked, who did you have in mind when you wrote this story? In other words, who is your reader? But we seldom think of the artist imagining their audience. It's also important to remember that artists may not be remote from their audience in the phase of art making. They may not be squirreled away in their studio producing art in a moment of retreat.
I'm always thinking, how does the moment of contact take place between an audience and the face value of what is going to be experienced? I don't. In terms of like thinking about my audience kind of consciously as a figure or as a kind of social group, I don't really. I sort of try not to do that. I try not to think about who my audience is going to, how they're going to look, and how they're going to sound, and what group and what class and blah, blah, blah. I try to ignore those things. I guess I fall back to that Felix Gonzalez-Torres kind of mantra that you make work for an audience that doesn't exist yet, but that you hope will occupy the museum after you're gone.
With this work, I guess the kind of collaborative act was my real engagement with a person. So it was about the backwards and forwards between myself and the collective. And I think the work in a way embodies that, in that it's a very open, kind of transparent work. It's not immediately clear what it does. The score is open. It doesn't lend itself to a particular kind of realization. So I think some of that, the kind of openness to any voice, is in the work.
When I'm making artwork, when I begin a project, I guess it depends on the project itself. If someone's invited me to do something, then I think about the place where this work will end up, and that audience, already attached to it. So those are one of the considerations. If I'm just sort of making things just because I want to, I'm not always thinking consciously about an audience. But then sometimes I am, I am thinking about an audience. I don't think you should always feel like I need to be so radical. Like, I can just be quite subtle about what I'm trying to say. I tried something new. I was trying something new. And is that okay? Is that okay? I think it's okay.
Treating the gallery as a kind of lab, as a kind of test space for these ideas to happen, seems it needs to be more than a lab. It needs to be a space of, radical change or something like that.